I'm Peter Stanton, publisher of the Worcester Business Journal, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our annual economic forecast, a partnership of the WBJ and the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce. A month ago, our registrations were running a little bit behind last year's pace, and what do you know, the stock market went crazy, a couple thousand-point swoons, flying all over the place, and son of a gun if we don't have a larger turnout than last year. So nothing like a little, that's great, yeah, nothing like a little volatility to turn out the house. But thank you all for making it this morning. As you can see, we've got a very strong program with a terrific set of speakers. This event is made possible by the support of our sponsors and by the hard work of the events team from both the Worcester Business Journal and from the Chamber. So thank you to our staffs to make it happen and to our sponsors. And those sponsors are our event partner, Worcester Chamber of Commerce, our presenting sponsor, Bank of America U.S. Trust, our corporate sponsor, the Worcester Regional Airport, and supporting sponsors, Bolus Lynch, Cumulus Global, National Grid, and Spectrum Business. And many of these businesses have booths and representatives here to chat with you. So thank you to all of them for their support. And I'd like to introduce next Tim Murray, who's the president and CEO of the Worcester Regional Chamber, for a few remarks. Tim.
Thank you, Peter. And just to reiterate, thank you to our keynote, Jeff. He's been here in the past, and I think people really enjoy him, and rightfully so. I also want to acknowledge Will Aubuchon, Mike Eldredge, and John Pranckevicius. I think each of them bring a perspective in terms of what's happening in their industries, and it is all very much related to the success of our local economy, but I think related to the broader economy as well. So I really look forward to their remarks. I also, like Peter, want to recognize the staffs of the Worcester Business Journal and the Chamber of Commerce who work almost year-round to help put this event together as they bat around ideas and themes and speakers and panelists. So I want to just publicly acknowledge them. And also Colleen Bamford from WPI for serving as our moderator. She brings a perspective from not just WPI, but as a local news personality back in the day. So thank you, Colleen, as well. We see real momentum continuing in Worcester and in the region, and that is because of so much of the work that you are all doing. And at the Chamber, we're just happy to be that advocate and be a part of it. So I just want to say thank you to our Chamber member businesses. Those who aren't, we'd love to have a conversation. But we look forward to an informative morning. This is one of the longer events, as Peter said, but it's also one of the most substantive in terms of expertise and learning about what's happening in our city, in our region, and nationally and internationally. So thanks again, and look forward to the program.
And next, I would like to welcome up Michael Garand. Michael is the Senior VP of Private and Private Client Advisor at U.S. Trust, Bank of America. Michael.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming this morning, and thank you for the introduction, Peter. Let me start off by saying how proud Bank of America is of our long-standing relationship with two phenomenal institutions, the Worcester Business Journal and the Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce. Two organizations that are perfectly aligned with the driving purpose of our company, Bank of America, which is to make people's financial lives better through the power of every connection. Like everyone in this room, Bank of America is deeply invested in making sure Worcester's economy is thriving. We do that by driving responsible growth through our 8 lines of business, growing and winning with a customer-focused strategy, and meeting the financial needs of our clients, customers, and business owners in a manner that helps them achieve their life's priorities. We also want to ensure we are supporting this community in a way that truly makes a difference every day. That's because we know we're only as healthy as the communities where we do business and where our 5,000 Massachusetts employees live. I'm joined this morning by several of my colleagues, familiar faces in the community, who bring our world-class expertise to Worcester every day through U.S. Trust, Merrill Lynch, business banking, and our financial centers. It's terrific to also see our clients, to whom I would like to extend a sincere thanks for doing business with Bank of America. We appreciate and truly value the trust you put in us, and we're grateful for the opportunity to have you as customers and clients. Peter and Tim, thank you for the important work you do to create, promote, and drive a vibrant Worcester economy through events like today's. Bank of America is honored to play a role in today's program, and we're looking forward to an interesting dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So before we get into the speaking program, I'm going to run through the top finishers in our Economist of the Year awards. And for those who've been to this event before, you know that there's a slip of paper on all the tables that says, Economist of the Year, and ask you 4 or 5 or 6 questions. And we had 57 entries last year. And I'm going to show, so there are 5 individual questions, and then we took the collective scores, like where you placed first, second, 57th, and we have 3 Economists of the Year that get prizes. The top winner, 1 out of the 3, our slides on all the first ones show 3 people. The top person gets a coffee gift card, and the top 3 on the Economist of the Year get a restaurant gift card and an Aubuchon hardware gift card. How about that, huh? Yeah, baby. Okay, so let's jump into it. The first question is, the Dow will be on 12/31/17, guessed a year ago. It was at 24,719. One person guessed that it was higher than it actually turned out to be, just one. The winner, closest to it, Eric Getz, TD Bank, 23,200. Second place, look at that, Ryan Henderson, Maynard High School. We got a Maynard High School table back there. Guys, can you stand up, give us a wave? Maynard High School. And third, Nick DeCastro. So we got some brilliant minds there. If you're looking for interns or connections, check in with that table afterwards. Okay, that's the Dow. Federal unemployment rate ended up at 4.1%. Glenn Bunnell from Tacit Advisors got it right on the button. First place. We got second place, Eric Gates again from TD Bank, and then tie for third, Amanda Mulhall, Charlie Fitzsimmons, Mina Chabani, and Janika Pike. So congratulations to all of them. Congratulations. Massachusetts unemployment rate, this is interesting. It ended up being 3.5%, and Jeff will probably explain to us that that's like really low. We might not want it much lower. But a lot of people, 46 out of them, guessed it would be even lower than that. Chris Mahan from RH White got it on the button. He's our winner. And Andy Barron of WPI and John Peculis of Fidelity Bank were also, it says 111. They were second and third. Congrats. GDP. We have one winner. That's Charlie Dunn, Commerce Bank, 2.6%. Amanda Mulhall and Kurt Isaacson were 2.5 and 2.8. The next two closest in second and third place. Nice work. And this is interesting how the group is smarter than any individual. Crude oil ended up at 61.19. 25 guessed higher than that. 33 guessed lower. The average guess was $61.07, which was even closer to the real number than the actual winner, which is John Peculius again. So Chris Mahan, R.H. White, Phil Sear, and Chet Petrizak from Knight Automotive round out the top three. Congratulations. And now here we go. Drum roll, please. Economist of the Year. Wait a second. We shouldn't. Oh, you know what? We cut and pasted that 6150 in. Sorry, that shouldn't be there. Minor editor's error. But John was first place with 59 total points across the 5 categories. Glenn Brunell, Tacit Advisors, 61 points. And Kurt Isaacson from Spectrum Health Systems, 76 points. Congratulations to everyone. And rather than everybody coming up and taking the time to do that, the registration area will have all the prizes for the winners in the first 5 and the top 3 in that last grouping. Okay? So you can get your prizes afterwards. And I would just remind you to please fill out that card of top economists so you can be part of next year's show. The other cards on your table are a little index card where if you have questions for the panel, as opposed to folks handing around a microphone, we're going to have folks write down their questions, and we're going to be collecting them. So when Colleen's up here, moderating that discussion, she'll be handed the questions that come from the audience. So also look to those postcards. So it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. You've got a longer bio in the program, but just to read a few of the highlights, Jeff Fuhrer is Executive VP, Senior Policy Advisor at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, an advisor to the bank's Regional and Community Outreach Department, and responsible for the bank's diversity and inclusion areas. He has also served as an associate economist at the Federal Open Market Committee, regularly attending this important policy-making meeting with the bigwigs, including the Boston Bank's president. Despite his youthful looks, Jeff's been with the Federal Reserve since the mid-'80s, when he began working there as a researcher while earning his PhD at a small school in Cambridge, Harvard. He has honed his public speaking skills over the years to a very high level. He speaks widely and has been a keynote at this event for several times. At a recent economic event that was held in Portland, Maine, by our sister publication, Maine Biz, Jeff was introduced by our editor there as a rock star economist. So he got to the podium, this is in Maine, and Jeff gets up and he tells this funny story about when he was introduced by Kevin O'Connor, who's that guy who wrote This Old House, Kevin O'Connor, the redheaded guy, went to Holy Cross. And Kevin had asked him, he said, Jeff, I'm going to introduce you. Do you have a theme song you like to be played? And I think Jeff kind of looked at him like he had two heads and said, well, I don't actually have a theme song. So after hearing that story, I thought it was important for us to find a theme song for Jeff for his runway walk up to the podium. So I went onto YouTube and I typed in Rockstar. And what came up was a song of that very name by the now this is going to test some of you guys, but by the rapper Post Malone, okay? This song debuted in September and hit #1 on the Billboard 100 this past fall, so it is very au courant. I have a 12-year-old son who listens to 94.5, all right? So here it is. Let's give a listen to Rockstar, and please welcome Jeff Fuhrer. I know we would all like to go to the beat a little longer, but in preparing this, I took a deeper look at the song, and I couldn't help but think that you and your homies at the Fed ought to be looking closer at popular music for insights into consumer behavior, which represents close to 70% of economic activity. So I want to have just a careful look at one line. Can we hear that one line?
Why you got a 12-car garage and you only got 6 cars?
Okay, so if you didn't hear that clearly, you got a 12-car garage and you only got 6 cars. So reflecting on that line, maybe you can start to unpack for us what that means about demand in the automotive sector, possible overbuilding in residential, inventories, and overall consumer demand. Thanks, Jeff. It's all yours.
Well, thank you, Peter. That is the best introduction I have ever had. Absolutely. So, Peter there's the rock star. I am a mere roadie to Peter's rock star. I want you all to know how much the Fed is willing to do for Worcester. And Peter did give me a call 3 weeks ago and said, it looks like the attendance is going to be a little bit low. And I said, I think there's something I can do. And the Fed, of course, then arranged to tank the stock market by several thousand points and bring it up and down and up and down. And so your interest was piqued as a result. But that's what we do at the Fed for Worcester. I mean, it may not have been great for the overall economy. That's not really important. It's this event that matters. So that's what we did. This is a disclaimer. You can read that. And these are the topics we're going to cover today. for a little bit, and you can look at them, but let's get right to them. So, wow, now there's all this pop music in my head. What would be a good... Okay, well, let's talk about the economy. So what's happened recently in the economy? So 3 solid quarters of good growth in ending 2017, the last 3. They averaged close to 3%. Those are the black bars in the little chart there, right? And then there's some breakdown that shows you what are the things that contributed most to GDP growth during that period. And the blue bars are consumption spending. And since the 6-car line was there, remember that consumption spending it's about 70% of GDP, so it's very important. And it was growing quite nicely throughout the year, especially the last 3 quarters. Interestingly, so capital investment, which is the green bars, that's showing you the contribution to GDP growth, grew in the last couple of quarters close to 10%, at a close to 10% rate. That's great because early in the recovery, it wasn't growing that fast at all. And so it's nice to see capital investment coming along as well. There's a couple other bars in there that basically we call those the bars that bop around a fair amount. And that's what they do. They bop around, and so don't worry about them. They come and they go. So that recent history, looking towards the future, thinking about some of the things that we think are going to support growth, let's think about supports for consumer spending. The first line I just flashed up there is what happened to stock market wealth. So you can see there was a little dipsy doodle at the end of that line. That's what happened most recently. But through, this is starting at the end of 2016, so through 2017 and up to the present, household net worth has increased in large part because of increases in stock market, although that's not held by every household. Also because of increases in housing wealth, which is the next line I'm flashing up there. Didn't grow as fast, but is still increasing on average in the US economy. So those are wealth supports for consumer spending. And then, of course, even more important is the last line, which is growth in disposable income. So the income they have to spend after taxes and so on. All those things are good supports for consumer spending. So it suggests that looking forward, we're going to continue to see pretty good growth, particularly for Aubuchon hardware, but also for some other consumer outlets, I would think. We actually have a separate Aubuchon forecast, as you probably know. We have about 30 economists who work on the Aubuchon sector. It's all about Worcester today. Just that's what it is. This is what we do. And as I said, capital investment has rebounded. A somewhat forward-looking set of indicators are there. What that shows you in the blue line, this is the bottom panel, are the orders for capital goods. So people who want capital goods, they place an order to get it delivered. It takes some weeks or months to have it delivered, and then that turns into the green line, which is shipments of capital goods. When you see the blue line above the green line, orders are in excess of shipments. That means that shipments are going to be higher going forward. And that's what we've seen over the recent months. Residential construction also had a flat spot back toward the beginning of 2017, and that seems to be increasing as well. So those are 3 key components that add up to most of GDP. The underpinnings for those are looking good, so that's good. I would now then be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit more about the stock market because people worry. How many of you are a little bit worried? How many of you have anxiety or have not slept just as well as you normally do at night? Anybody want to admit to that? Anybody? Nobody. You are all sleeping great. Peter, I don't want to trust, after what he just did for the intro, I'm not sure he's like the most stable, reliable source of information. So I don't want to trust him. But so most of you are still sleeping well, that's good. But there are folks who do have anxiety about the stock market. And so there's a euphemism we use. We say stocks have been active in recent days. And there's a picture there that shows, so the green line is what happened to the stock market index since the presidential election in 2016. It was going up and up and up and up. And then it turned red, it went down. And then rebounded a bit recently. The VIX, which is a great name, sounds like a kid's cereal, but it's not. It's actually a volatility index, and that you can see was doing nothing until just recently. So the amount of volatility, fluctuation in the stock market went up a bunch recently. Some of the explanations that I really enjoy reading, because they make absolutely no sense, are people say, well, there were more sellers than buyers in the market. It's like, wait, what does that mean? So somebody went to sell and a transaction happened, but there was no buyer on the other side? I don't think that can happen. And then they said, well, there's profit taking, which just means what exactly? So, it means the market went down. So people don't really know how to explain what happened there, although they did actually blame it in part on the expected Fed reaction to some data that suggested that there was a little bit of wage and possibly price inflation, and the Fed would need to raise interest rates more rapidly. That makes more sense than the 2 I put there, so there's something to that. So you can actually blame the Fed a little bit. I'll explain that really we're just doing our job. The chart on the right just shows another way of thinking about the active stock market, which is the daily changes from day to day. What's the percentage change in the stock market? And it's going along fine until things start to go like this, sort of like an EKG. So we like the stock market to look like an inverse EKG. We like it to kind of do this, right? Which is, if that shows up on your heart monitor, that's not so good because it means you're dead. But then when it starts blipping again for the stock market, we're worried about that. For you, it's probably a good thing. So that's why it's an inverse EKG. Okay, and just to say, it isn't tremendously surprising that there might be some pause in the stock market because the ratio of stock prices to earnings, right? So presumably you buy a stock because you think it's going to deliver earnings over time. That's part of what the investment is about. That ratio has been pretty high, not the highest ever in history, but higher than most other periods. And so there's some question about whether stocks might be overvalued, but the chair of the Fed typically is loath to say that because it would not do anything good for Worcester or for the rest of the economy. So they don't usually say that. But anyway, you can see from the numbers, it's a little bit high. And so people were talking about whether it might make an adjustment or a correction or some other euphemism. So what the question then is, okay, suppose the stock market moves around. How bad is that for the economy? And the answer is, a key word there is persistent, I underline, because short-term fluctuations in the stock market really have very little influence on the economy. The average household is not checking its 401k balance every day, really, to say, well, whether I'm going to buy that 7th car or not. How many people have a 6-car garage? Anybody here? Nobody has a 6-car garage. Oh, sorry, so 12 cars, right. Well, I mean, you'd need a 6 just to house the 6, but this person had a 12-car garage. So I assume nobody here has 12, but nobody has a 6 either. You guys need to up your game a bit. You need more bling, I think. You need more larger garage. So anyway, the question is whether it's persistent, and as I showed you on the previous charts, and I'll reemphasize in a second, the dips in the stock market were temporary. They were down more than 10%. They're now down about between 5.5% and 6% because they rebounded a bit from where they were. So that may end up being a relatively temporary thing. But if they are persistent, there are a few different effects the stock market can have on the economy, and then I'll calibrate how large an effect they would have. So the first is just the wealth effect. If stock wealth goes down for a while, as you suggest, that makes people feel less well off because they have less in their accounts, and that might affect consumer spending. Another important one is that it's really only about 50% of the households that have any modest to significant stock holdings, but often what people see in the stock market is an indicator of how the economy is doing generally, so it might change consumer sentiment, which is what I've showed on this chart, might make people feel less confident about the economy, and therefore they would pull back a bit on their spending. And there is a correlation between the level of consumer sentiment and how much spending is going on, so that's what that chart shows. And the third one is just as stock prices go up and down, it raises and lowers the cost of raising equity capital for a firm, so that makes a difference as well. That said, the effects that we calculated that say if the stock market fell by 10% and stayed there for long enough to actually make a difference, some number of months at least, that might lead to a 3 to 4/10 of a percentage point drop in consumer spending. That would be the major effect. And that chart on the bottom is for people who love analytical charts. It's a scatter plot. You like scatter plots? How many of you draw scatter plots like at night when you're eating your dessert, just for fun? Because it's like, wow, this dessert's good. If I only had a scatter plot to go with it, my nighttime experience would be complete. Or maybe I'd just be able to get to sleep faster. But anyway, that scatter plot just shows you that on average, when stock prices go up and down, so does consumer spending go up and down. And then we have more sophisticated models to give you the estimate I just put there. So it's a modest effect, unless, of course, there's say a 40 or 50% decline in stock prices, and then that effect is multiplied, so it gets to be significant. But it's not something to get deeply concerned about, so I'm glad to see that most of you are still sleeping well, because you should. I'm not going to spend that much time on this chart, but it's just to summarize the things that most of you know, I think, already from reading the papers. And these are some of the major provisions for households and for businesses in the Tax Reform Act that was passed in December of last year. Most households get a tax cut. It is temporary for reasons of keeping the deficit from looking absolutely criminal. They cut them off in 2025. They had to do that or it just would never have worked. Some other provisions there that are important about the ACA. I hope that's an overestimate. That's not my estimate, but it is a reasonable estimate that says uninsured will increase by approximately 13 million because of the repeal of the individual mandate. That's a lot of people. We hope that's not quite what happens, but we will see. So those are some things for households. You know about the corporate tax rate cut, I'm sure at this point. Some changes for repatriated earnings, and also for expensing depreciation, which all of those things together will probably make some difference on the economy. And that's what I want to show you in this slide. What's the likely effect? So first, I want to say, historically, the link between increases in profits and investment is weak. So here's the long span of that history. So this is showing you what has happened to liquid assets. You could draw the same chart for profits, both of which have trended up over the last 30 years or so. So they definitely, liquid assets, the amount of cash-like things that businesses have on hand has grown quite significantly over the years. And this is scaled by the overall size of the economy. It's not just, I'm not just playing fun and games with you with these charts. These are real things. So anyway, there's liquid assets going up. And at the same time, the amount of those assets that's spent on fixed investment has been going down. And then if you look at specific episodes, it's not clear that when firms get profits, they spend it mostly on investment and employment. Now, there have been some public announcements in the last several weeks of firms that will spend a little more on wages, give bonuses, perhaps hire some more people. You have to sift through that to be careful about how much of it came from the tax cuts per se and how much was plans they already had in place and are going to announce now because there's an opportunity to do so. I actually hope there will be some effect because I think there'll be some stimulative effect on consumer spending. I hope there is some effect on employment and so on. That wouldn't be a bad thing. So my working assumption is that altogether that tax package will add about 1.25 percentage points to GDP over 3 years. So something like 4/10 this year, 3/10 the next couple of years. So that's not enormous. But it is something, so now we need to talk about whether that's a good or a bad thing. On average, it's good to have more output and more employment, but there are limits, so that's what I want to talk about in a moment. To summarize the outlook overall, it's probably going to look, 2018 looks something like 2017, and then growth paring back a little bit in the subsequent years. So I put these little green shaded bars around there because there's uncertainty about the future. I in particular, but many other economists also are good at forecasting the past, but it's much harder to forecast the future because it has not happened yet, and so we just don't know. So we put these bands of uncertainty around it to say it could be a little lower, it could be a little higher, but to give you a sense, it's in the highest 2s for this year and then down to the lower 2s and a bit below for the next 2 years after that. So that's our sense. The bottom panel gives you a sense of what the implications should be for the unemployment rate. And what that shows you is the regularity over the last 7 years, whereby the green bars show you that GDP grew on average around 2%, a little bit higher. And as it grew at 2%, consistently the unemployment rate fell. So those are the blue bars. They're all below 0, so that's negative. So that means unemployment is falling. Through all of those years, unemployment fell by somewhere between 0.5 and 1 percentage point. But that means if we get the growth that I'm forecasting, you should expect to see continued declines in the unemployment rate, which we will see. A quick note on the view from Worcester. As Peter suggested, the unemployment rate is quite low now at about 4%, which is a bit below the national average. That's for Worcester, and that's what's shown in the chart there. The national average, as you saw, from the contest winners was 4.1%. I just want to say there's no question, I hope you know, that I would have won that contest if I had participated, but I was not eligible. I have to be able to win that kind of. Anyway, but I didn't participate. I'm just not eligible. Anyway, I had all those numbers exactly right. So that's where Worcester is for the unemployment rate, which is low, which is good. It's blipped up and down a little bit, but it's quite low, but for Worcester historical standards, so that's good. And then employment growth has been fairly steady at 3,000 to 4,000 per year for Worcester. This is the city of Worcester. Although in the last year it dipped down a little bit instead of to a little below 2,000 on average over the previous year. So there's an interesting question about why that is. My guess is it's somewhat temporary, but that's something worth taking a look at. Now, earlier I said the recovery on average is around 2%, so I want to show you a picture that documents that. Average growth actually 2.2% over the span of the recovery, which started in, anybody know when it started? How many years ago? 2009, yes. And which quarter or month? Either one is a winner. No, second quarter. But that was close. First quarter was close. The recovery started in the second quarter. So that's, that's pretty close. So 2.2%. So it's been going for coming up on 9 years now, and it's averaged 2.2%. That doesn't seem really high. And look, there's the average. I just put that line up for all of the post-1960s recoveries. It's about 3.5%. So it is slower than the average recovery pace. And people say, Jeff, how come? That's what they say to me, Jeff, how come? And I say, well, I have an answer to that. And the answer primarily is that productivity growth has been fairly slow. That's the blue line in the chart. You can see that earlier it was around 2%, and it's slipped to a little below 1% productivity growth of late. It's slow. And what that means is when productivity growth is slow, the sustainable rate of growth in the economy is a little bit slower as well. Okay? And so we're going to grow sustainably at something a little bit lower. So it's around a percentage point lower than some of the other recoveries we saw. That's most of the explanation for that. It also means that, as I showed on the previous chart, even when we're only growing 2.2%, yeah, that's not fast by historical standards, but it's a little bit above the sustainable rate of growth, and so we have seen the unemployment rate dropping as a consequence. So that's all consistent. There's the explanation. I have two charts, both of which you should take to your next cocktail party to explain, to amaze and delight people for one thing, and then to show them how much you know about economics. This is one of them. The second is coming up in a second. So now I just want to quickly talk about why we've raised rates. So, like all of us, we have parents who brought us into this world and can take us out just as quickly. That is true for the Federal Reserve as well. Congress created us, and if they don't like what we're doing, they can take us out, take us apart, and dismantle us just as quickly. They delegated to us two responsibilities. We call it the dual mandate. One is to achieve maximum sustainable employment. There's a limit, but sustainable maximum employment. And the other, there's low inflation. So where are we in achieving those two goals that Congress gave to us? The first is employment. So first, measures of labor market slack. The first one is the conventional unemployment rate. That's the red line. And then I put a gray bar up there, which shows you what are the estimates of what is a sustainable long-run unemployment rate for the overall U.S. economy. And it's somewhere between 4.4 and 4.9%, something like that, which is lower than it used to be. As you can see, we're below that today. So, if we're below the sustainable rate, it probably won't be sustained. The question is, what will happen to make a change there? I've added a broader measure of labor market slack, U6, which includes lots of other folks who are not counted as unemployed, but may well want to be in the labor force at some point, and that also has come down basically in lockstep and is now at levels about where it was prior to the recession. So that's good, and employment growth also has been strong. That's the next chart I'm showing you. As of the most recent numbers, we averaged 192,000 jobs per month over the last 3 months. In the month of January, we added 200,000 jobs net, and the unemployment rate stayed at about 4.1%. So doing good with employment growth. So on that part of our dual mandate, are we at maximum sustainable employment? Yeah, probably. Maybe even a little bit past sustainable, so we want to think about that. And then how does inflation compare to our goal? So everybody, what is the Fed's official inflation goal in percent? Do you know what it is? Sorry? 3. 3 is wrong. And any other guesses? 2. Thank you. 2 is correct. Okay. That is our goal, 2%. Good. I'm glad some people know that. If you thought it was 3, I need you to come talk to me after the session here. We have to use a taser on you or something. No, because that'll help you remember next time that it's 2, I'm pretty sure. You will remember after getting hit by the taser. So how close are we to 2%? So look, up through the beginning of 2017, we're pretty close. And then inflation went down a bit. And so we started to worry. We worried a lot of last year. That's part of my job description is I'm a worrier. I am. And so we worried. But then it started recently to head back up again towards 2%. There were some temporary things going on. Actually, like in March of last year, a lot of cell phone service contractors started cutting prices like by 50%. And while cell phone prices are only a little less than 1% of the consumer's basket, that was noticeable in the overall inflation numbers, but then they didn't cut it 50% every month for the next 10 months. They stopped. So that went away. We think there's some temporary things. That's a large part of what's going on. And particularly if unemployment continues to fall, say below 4%, probably inflation's going to make its way up a bit, and it seems to be starting on that track already. Okay, so what does that mean is going to happen to monetary policy? Everybody who comes here wants to know what's going to happen to interest rates, right? I mean, that's why you're here, so you can make a killing on the stock or the bond markets. I presume that's what you're here for. And so I'm going to help you with that. So, of course, I get a small cut of any profits that you make. But I hope you understand I'm completely facetious about that. I would get killed. I would get killed if I revealed any inside information. So I don't. These are publicly available numbers. So these are the Fed's own predictions of the rate increases they thought were going to happen as of December of a particular year for the 4 quarters of the next year. Starting in 2014. They thought that in 2015 there were going to be 3, there was only 1. They thought in 2016, as of the end of 2015, there were going to be 4, there was only 1. And then in end of 2016, they predicted 3 for 2017 last year, and they were right. They finally got it right. Their most recent prediction as of December says approximately 3 increases, 3 1/4 point increases in the interest rate this year. We will see how that goes. There have been none so far, but there's only been 1 meeting. And then the financial markets assessment similarly of what the Fed's likely to do. And these are probabilities for the 4 policy meetings of 2018 as assessed by the markets. At least 1 increase in the blue bars, at least 2 in the yellow orangey bars, 3 in the red, 4 in the magenta. I think that's magenta. Anybody a color expert in the back? Yes, it is magenta. Now I have a confirmation. That is magenta. Thank you. Excellent. And so they're increasing, they have probabilities of somewhere around 3, it looks like maybe by the end of the year, some chance of 4. Are there any risks to too low interest rates? So I told you there were going to be 2 graphs you could take home and show to folks. This is the second one. This is really important. So the low interest rates typically imply falling unemployment because we're stimulating the economy, and if it grows faster than sustainable, so the unemployment rate falls. And so you can see in this chart shows you the difference between unemployment rate and what we now believe to have been the sustainable rate of unemployment, the natural rate. So when the red line falls below the horizontal black line there, it's negative, which means that unemployment is lower than the sustainable rate. So labor markets are really tight. Okay, so what you can see is that after every single one of those episodes where the unemployment rate fell significantly below the natural rate, the sustainable rate, a gray bar happened. I mean, right? You don't want gray bars happening, do you? I don't. Anybody know what the gray bars are? Recessions, right? And so there are no exceptions. Every single time that happened, there was a recession that followed. So you should take this to your next cocktail party, social event, soccer game, marching band practice, anything that you or your children or your relatives or friends are involved in, and show people that, I don't know if you guys know this, you should say, and you can sound like an expert, but after every single time that the unemployment rate fell too low below sustainable, we had a recession following that, and they're going to go, wow, you are really boring. So that will be fun to do. But of course, the risk here is we don't want a recession to happen. We want the recovery to continue. It's been 9 years. Recessions, as Chair Yellen said recently, recessions do not die of old age. And there's no reason recoveries do not die of old age. There's no reason a recovery can't go on for 10, 11, 12, 13 years. So we'd prefer a sustained recovery. And so those are some of the reasons we're raising interest rates very gradually. These 2 charts just show you that normally when we raise rates, we expect it to be reflected in other financial market conditions like the stock market, interest rates, the exchange value of the dollar, and so on. And interestingly, that has not been the case overwhelmingly so far. So we've increased 5 times since December of 2015 for a total of 1.25 percentage points. That's good, but you can see that the exchange rate is close to where it was at the beginning of that tightening cycle. The S&P 500 has continued to rise despite the recent drop. There's been a little bit of a resurgence. It's higher than it was when we started tightening. And then the interest rates and spreads below have not reflected much of our tightening. There is a little bit of movement up in the mortgage rate, which we would expect to be the case. So that means we still have some work to do. We want the recovery to keep going, but we also don't want it to get too far and get us into trouble, as that recession-shaded chart showed you. So my last chart here is about long-term challenges in Massachusetts. So I want to show you some cities in Massachusetts that have elevated poverty rates. The Fed cares about this too. We care about the monetary policy, business cycle things, but there are also secular issues in most of the cities and many of the rural areas in New England that we're paying attention to and trying to work on over time. We can talk about that another time, maybe during the Q&A session. We'll see. But these are cities with elevated poverty rates as of 2012 in the red bars and 2016 in the green bars. And the question is, has it improved? And the answer is, for some cities, yes. So for some cities, the recovery has lowered the poverty rate for all adults in the cities indicated. For some cities, not as much. And then this is just showing you that for the population under the age of 18, so citizens who are under age 18 kids, the poverty rate is even a little bit higher, and it has improved in some cities, and others, so it continues to rise. So we still have work to do there. All right, new leadership of the Fed. I said the last chart, but I lied. I'm a congenital liar. I just lie about everything. Well, actually, that's the only thing I've lied about in my entire life. So this is the new leadership of the Fed. So there's Janet Yellen in a happy moment. She was the chair of the Fed. You knew, I hope, that Janet Yellen was she was. So how many female chairs have there been before Janet Yellen at the top of the Fed? Yeah, 0, right? She was the first. Very important for all kinds of reasons. She's also, some people would say the most, but at least one of the most qualified Fed chair ever. But she's going. So, exit stage left. And there is Jay Powell, who is now the new chairman. He was confirmed and sworn in and all that. And what does that mean? So mostly I think it means continuity. Jay Powell, they came from 2 different political parties, but he's a pretty centrist guy. He's a sensible guy. He's a smart guy. He listens, and those are all good attributes in a public servant, don't you think? I'll leave it at that. So but he is. So he's somebody I know a bit, and he will be a good person on top. Mostly continuity, I think, similar to the policies that Janet Yellen had, both with respect to monetary policy and regulation. I would note that there are other openings in the leadership of the Fed. The vice chairman of the board of governors, 3 other governor slots, and how they're going to pan out is not quite clear yet. So you can send your votes in, because I'd be happy to. So send your votes in for me. No, write-in campaigns are okay. They love that at the Fed. Just tell them it's the rock star guy from Boston. I'm sure that'll get me in. So anyway, that's the change in leadership, but I think it's mostly continuity, so I think that's the good news there. So with that, let me stop, and we can go on to the panel, and thank you for your attention.
Okay, so the forum is, our moderator is going to come up. We're going to hear from 3 different speakers, and we're going to have a panel conversation, Q&A, and the whole 9 yards. So it's my pleasure to introduce Colleen Womback, who is a senior public relations manager at WPI. Prior to that, Colleen was a reporter and anchor and producer for Worcester TV News Tonight and Charter TV3, and also served as communications specialist for the city of Worcester. We appreciate Colleen taking on this important role. Colleen.
I was waiting for my theme song. Yeah. You set the precedent. I will soldier on. Anyway, I want to thank Peter, Worcester Business Journal, Worcester Regional Chamber of Commerce, for inviting me to moderate today's very important discussion. I did get a sneak preview on the panelists' PowerPoints that you're going to be seeing shortly, and there's a lot to talk about. It really is a great combination of long-term family businesses, companies that span the globe, and then the transportation sector through Massport, and just all those key indicators and how they come together to why we're all here today. I will assure you that I'm going to be very short, because if you were looking for me for an economic forecast, I have my magic 8 ball. And that's all I can give you. Although over the past couple of weeks, I could have been right a couple of times. So maybe you can see me after if Jeff didn't fill you in on enough. I can certainly help with that. The outlook is unclear. Since there is a lot of uncertainty, again, we're coming here today to make some sense out of it, to get some clarity, and to look at those key factors that can keep us on track. Again, I mentioned that the family business Aubuchon Hardware in particular has been in the region for over 100 years. So they've seen a lot of ups and downs. Through it all, they are more than thriving. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Will Aubuchon. He is the 5th CEO of the family hardware store chain, founded in 1908. The company was started by his grandfather and now has 100 stores in New England and upstate New York. Just in the past year, Aubuchon changed the 90-year-old distribution model to a system of multiple suppliers, vastly increasing the array of available merchandise. Talk about changing with the times. Working with a passionate and dedicated team of family members and long-term employees, Aubuchon plans to develop the most convenient hometown hardware store chain in the industry. He's combining his years of knowledge of the industry with his savvy technology and marketing capabilities, even producing his own video blogs. Very important as a former video journalist. It is my pleasure to introduce Will Aubuchon.
Good morning, everybody. I just want to thank the Worcester Business Journal and all the sponsors for having me here this morning. On behalf of everyone at Aubuchon Hardware, it's a pleasure to be able to tell our story. And here's the team. Actually, this is us celebrating a grand opening in 2017 in Williamstown, Massachusetts. Aubuchon Hardware was founded in 1908 by my great-grandfather, the guy with the yellow arrow. This is him in the first store in Fitchburg, Mass. And he didn't own this store at this point, but he did buy it when he was 23. And what's remarkable about my great-grandfather is that, you know, with a third-grade education, it wasn't just about that single store and making a living in that single store. Despite, or in spite of the Great Depression and World War I and World War II, he grew this company to over 30 stores in that first generation, and we certainly would not be here if it wasn't for him. It's a remarkable story. My grandfather took over from there. He actually grew the company most significantly after World War II, in that time when it was just a good time to grow in this country, and he did a remarkable job bringing us across all the Northeast. From there, my dad took over and worked very closely with my uncle Marcus, who also served as CEO for a few years. And the two of them worked as an incredible team over the years, primarily dealing with the influx of competition starting in the 80s with, of course, Home Depots and Lowe's and all of that. And their continuous investment in the business was so important. So needless to say, I am the 5th CEO, but I have some very, very large shoes to fill. Our purpose as a company is to serve those who depend on us and build on our heritage with pride. Our mission, already stated, to be the most convenient hometown hardware store on the planet. We operate 105 stores throughout New England and upstate New York. We employ 1,300 employees, and last year we did revenues of $168 million. But like anyone in retail today, we are surrounded by competition. So in our market, those are the Home Depots that exist in our market. Those are the Lowe's that exist in the market. Those are the Ace Hardwares that exist in the market, the True Value stores, the Do It Best stores, the Tractor Supply stores, and if you put them all together, you get quite the eye chart. There's really 2 points about this eye chart. Number one, despite our size, $168 million in revenue, and despite the fact that I've just learned we have 30 full-time economists focused on our account, we have an enormous scale disadvantage at Aubuchon Hardware. Our revenues equal 4 Home Depots. There's 2,200 Home Depots, 1,800 Lowe's in this country. We have an enormous scale disadvantage as a company, and we use that in thinking about how we go about our business. The other thing that eye chart shows is that the world does not need more hardware stores. What the world needs, though, is better hardware stores, and I want to come back to that in a moment. All right, so we all know who this guy is, right? He was maybe going to be a neighbor in Worcester with HQ2, right? And that didn't work out. Jeff Bezos, very smart guy, very innovative, been very successful. And one way he's been very successful is with Amazon Prime. So I'd like to do a quick little study here in the room. Please raise your hand if you've ever bought something on Amazon. Okay, look around, it's amazing, right? Now keep your hand in the air if you are currently an Amazon Prime customer. Okay, look around, that's amazing. Now, last question, keep your hand in the air if you are an Amazon Prime customer more than 10 years ago. Look at all the hands go down. All right, so what did we just represent there? What did we demonstrate? Well, something that Bill Gates talks about. We always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. Don't let yourself be lulled into inaction. I think that's wise advice for all of us in this room, and we just demonstrated it there with Amazon Prime. It's impossible, you cannot be complacent, especially in retail today. Going from one smart guy to another smart guy, Warren Buffett said something in May of 2016, Amazon is a big, big force and has already disrupted plenty of people and it will disrupt more. That was at his shareholder meeting. That August of 2016, Walmart going after Amazon, getting serious about digital, buys Jet. Despite that, 1 year ago, February 2017, Warren Buffett basically pulls out of Walmart as an investment. Huge milestone in my mind in terms of retail. Signaling the death of retail as we know it, goes the headline, which I don't believe in. And then probably the most important story from the past year is Amazon buying Whole Foods, and that occurred in August of 2017. So if you are in retail today, it's hard not to feel some days or ask the question, is the sky falling? And the answer is no. The answer is no. Despite the fact that all the growth is coming from online and digital channels for retail these days, in-store retail is still king. It dominates. When you ask customers across the board, across all categories, how they prefer to shop, in-store is still leads the way. And there's two simple reasons for that: to get the product immediately and to be able to see, touch, and try the merchandise. Makes sense. Okay, so the bottom line is the physical store matters, but that's not good enough, right? Going back to the eye chart, the world has too many hardware stores. We need better ones. So what do better hardware stores look like? And perhaps the most frequent question I get all the time is, how do you compete? Just how do you compete against not just now the big boxes, but the Amazons of the world? And my answer to that is very simple. We at Aubuchon Hardware are essentially doubling down on the basics of retail, Retail 101. And there's 3 components to that today. The first component is simple supply and demand. And that has always been one of the pillars of this stool. It's also one of the primary reasons we made a massive change to our company this past year in eliminating distribution. Our distribution center forced us into a cookie cutter mold. And the reality is every single market that we're in has different demand, different supply and demand. And we need to become exceptional at matching demand and supply. And we are now working with independent distributors to help us with that, with a much broader assortment of products. So that's number 1. Number 2, people. This has always been part of our tradition throughout our entire history in providing customer service, but I think now more than ever, customers are going to visit stores less for product and more for people moving into the future. And so investing in training, investing in wages, investing in people, absolutely critical to Retail 101. And finally, innovation has always been a part of retail, but now more than ever. A perfect example of that is imagine a store today not accepting credit cards. That would feel really out of sync, wouldn't it? I believe that same feeling of out of syncness you're going to feel that for any retailer in the next few years that isn't showing their live inventory online and allowing simple things like order online, pick up in store, which, by the way, we launched this week, and we're very excited about that. Concerns. The concerns I have as in my role thinking about Aubuchon Hardware and our future, I think the pace of change of consumer habits, it's so difficult, especially with our scale disadvantage. Number 2, minimum wage, mandatory minimum wage increases. It's a bad policy. There's a difference between starting wage and living wage. And I think that policy completely misses the mark. I couldn't agree more with investing in people and investing in wages, but a mandatory minimum wage is bad policy. And the third concern that I really have that I think most people share probably is healthcare costs. Completely out of control. In our case, the employer mandate of treating full-time employees, identifying full-time employees as 30 hours or more, for retail is very, very difficult, and that's a major concern. The future at Aubuchon Hardware is very bright, though. I'm very excited about it. So if we zoom out on the map, right, of all of our store locations, here we are, the 105 locations that we have in the Northeast. Believe it or not, there are 30,000 independent hardware stores throughout this country. And the vast majority of them are owned by baby boomers. And not all of them have a succession plan. And so our basic, simple strategic plan as a company is, one, build a better hardware store based on Retail 101 with a healthy dose of innovation, and two, grow through acquisition. If there's 30,000 hardware stores in this country and we're 105, our full potential is somewhere in the middle. And I don't know where that is yet, but that's basically our plan. I want to just thank you all for having me this morning. Spring is right around the corner. So if you do have an Aubuchon hardware store in your neighborhood, please become a loyalty member if you're not already. And please come in and shop with us and let us fix you right up. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right, thanks, Will. I will be signing up for a loyalty card. I spend a lot of time at home improvement stores. Next up is Michael Eldredge. Michael Eldredge is Vice President and Global Head of Primetals Technologies' long-rolling business. One of 14 locations in the United States, the company's Worcester, Massachusetts facility designs and manufactures high-speed equipment used in steel, copper, and aluminum rolling mills to produce end products like reinforcing bar and wire. Michael's career with the company began as a design engineer for Morgan Construction in 1992 and continued with positions of increasing responsibility. After the 2008 Siemens acquisition of Morgan, he continued serving in leadership roles, including head of the Siemens Metals Technology business based in Shanghai. Michael moved back to Worcester to head the company's long-rolling business prior to the 2015 formation of the Primetals Technologies joint venture. He holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from Worcester Polytechnic Institute. I had to add that in my job description. And without further ado, I'd like to bring up Michael Eldredge.
Good morning. Unlike Jeff, I am not a rock star, but I do have this winter 6 cars jammed into my 3-car garage. And this requires skill in the game of Tetris to make this happen. So I just wanted to share that with you. I want to explain about Primetals. Whoop, I've advanced too far already. So Primetals Technologies company is a global player in the metals industry. We are worldwide. We have a corporate headquarters in London, about 1,800 people in the Americas, 1,000 of which are in the US, and Worcester is the single biggest location for Primetals in the US. Other major locations in the US are Alpharetta, which is right outside Atlanta, and then Canonsburg, which is basically Pittsburgh, and the remaining locations are service shops located near our customers. So in the metals business, there's, I'll say, upstream and downstream. So starting from steel making steel from iron ore, to post-processing after rolling, producing, say, galvanized coated steels or things like this. So we're in the full chain of this. Our Worcester business, from the long rolling perspective, is part of the hot rolling business, which is shown kind of in the middle of this layout. Then in addition to this, underneath all of these are electrics and automation, so all the control systems for these facilities. We have an environmental portfolio related to primarily, I'll say, air quality, but also some other innovative technologies that use CO2 to do some biological processes, which then produce methane, which can then be used again for further energy production. And then across all of this is a service business. So big component of what we do and what we do in Worcester as well is our metallurgical services group. So we sell equipment, we're an OEM, but we then also service that equipment. So the Worcester location, as mentioned before, so started in 130 years ago, 1888, as Morgan Construction Company. Very similar to Aubuchon, 5 generations. I think in 2008, one thing was the market was very hot. It was definitely the right time to sell, and also maybe ran out of family successors, which is also true. Interest in the family to continue. So it was sold to Siemens, a German outfit, and we became part of Siemens VAI Metals. Then in 2015, a joint venture was formed between Siemens and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, and Primetals was created as a separate company with Mitsubishi Heavy as the majority shareholder. Our Worcester location, so we're service for all types of plants, but from the long rolling business, we focus on wire rod mills. I'll explain a little bit more about what that is. And why are we in Worcester? People always ask, what's Worcester have to do with the steel industry? Well, in the late 1800s, Worcester was the center of wire production in the United States. And there's still actually quite a few companies in this area that do wire drawing work. And Washburn and Moen, if you go, used to be where Northworks restaurant, right? It was the Northworks, now the Fix Burger Bar is there. But that building, that was a huge, steel plant, and they had basically a monopoly on the barbed wire business. And when you think about settling the west of the United States, that's an awful lot of barbed wire. So what do our customers produce? What is the end result? So actually there's quite a large variety when we talk about long products. Some things that are used directly as they come off the mill, like a reinforcing bar for concrete, angles, but other items are then drawn down into wire and made into many products that are in your everyday life. Coat hangers, springs, say barbed wire as they show there, nuts, bolts, steel, cable, wire rope, copper. We do copper and aluminum as well. And I always try to connect people to our business with things you might know from your life. So iconic structure, Golden Gate Bridge. All the suspension cables on that bridge were made by Roebling & Son, which operated multiple wire rod mills that we provided. Box spring mattress, Sterling Steel in Illinois, parent company Liggett & Platt, supplies 90% of the springs that are used in mattresses and box springs made in the United States. And they operate our equipment. Automobile sector, big driver. We recently got the final acceptance on a new rolling mill for Hyundai Steel, Hyundai Motor Corporation. So vertical integration for them to produce steel that's used in many aspects of the car, but another big automotive use is you have steel belted radials. The steel belts, that's all, starts off as a wire rod that's drawn into a steel wire, and automotive is a big consumer. I also looked at the Aubuchon website to see if there's any other products that maybe our customers make that I might find there. And so Red Brand Fencing from Keystone Steel and Wire in Peoria, Illinois. So they've been a customer for more than 100 years. And you can attach that fence to fence posts made by Chicago Heights Steel, who produces every one of those off a mill that we put in. And then you want to wire your house, Southwire, electrical wiring. They're a large customer, but also been a partner of ours in the copper and aluminum market for more than 50 years. And then, what do we make in Worcester? So there's a few shots from our workshop showing some of the equipment manufacturing. See a large, gearbox. A lot of what we make in the rolling equipment in Worcester is gearing type and gearbox looking equipment. Then in the middle, this is showing the finishing end of a rod mill. That product coming out is about the diameter of a pencil and goes 250 miles an hour. And then we have to then form that into a coil. And I mentioned long products. What do I mean? Well, that coil will be 5 miles long after it's rolled. And with such high speeds, requires very precise manufacturing, a lot of intensive engineering in the design side, and all of these high-speed critical products we make at our factory here in Worcester. We're in the U.S., but our business really is mostly not in the U.S. So when I talk about our challenges, and really global economic situations are somewhat more important than what's happening domestically. So, so the blue is representing what we do in the U.S. The red slice is the rest of North America, and then the green is the rest of the world. So you can see far and away, most of our business is not in the U.S., it's everywhere else. But you can see as steel companies return to profitability that there is an uptick in the U.S. share as they start spending more money on either modernization activity or consuming more spare parts as they increase production. So, what's been happening in the market? So we are seeing globally an upturn in the demand. I mean, globally, the steel companies are improving their position, and there is recovery in the developing economies and developed economies. Russia and Brazil finally seem to be getting out of their doldrums. And then China has also had a return to some more moderate growth. And China represents 45% of the world's production. All of North America produces about 116 million tons of steel. China by themselves produces about 850 million tons of steel, to put it in perspective. So it's a huge force globally in different ways. Either are they producing too much and dumping, or are they consuming and buying? So we expect overall growth will be modest, and then there's issues of, I'll say, rising nationalism. What I mean, tariffs, protectionism in different marketplaces, and they can cause, different problems. In the U.S., big talk about infrastructure, so lots of discussion, but no real concrete plan, being executed. Expect the automotive sector to stay flat and decelerate, and then construction to expand. The biggest consumer of steel in the U.S. is non-residential construction, then followed by automotive and white goods. And then steel prices, they've been up, they expect to stay up, and there's a very tight margin on our customer base on what their profit margins are slim. They're commodity producers, and a slight swing in that price drives their numbers considerably and drives their investment decision. We'll say certainly the U.S. producers or global producers are bullish on the U.S. U.S. has low energy costs, so there has been quite a bit of investment in the U.S. in new capacity. On the steelmaking side, we started up a new direct reduced iron plant in Corpus Christi for an Austrian company, VAI, last year. It's driven by belief in the strength of the U.S. market combined with low gas costs. Nucor Steel has placed orders for 3 new rolling mills in the past 2 months to go in as new capacity in the U.S. So there's definitely a view of the U.S. will be a good market. What are our challenges? So Primetals is one of 3 companies that are the big 3 in the metals industry, like the old Detroit big 3. There's just 3 big global players in metals. SMS Group out of Germany, who's also a licensee on certain technology, so they're a competitor, but they also license some technology from us. And Danieli in Italy. SMS, part of SMS that we compete with in the long rolling business, even though they're a German company, is actually next door to Danieli in Italy. So really, I have kind of 2 Italian competitors. And if you look at the challenges there, we're in the Northeast, high cost of living, comparatively high wages. Average salary is an example of an Italian engineer, 33,000 euros. I think WPI would be unhappy if a graduate was getting that recent graduate was getting that pay, and this is like an average, rate of pay. So we have a big wage disadvantage. And then exchange rates, showing the dollar to euro, what it's been, and also the dollar to the Chinese RMB. And the importance of the Chinese currency is one very big market for us. And then for all the non-high-tech equipment, all of us, our competitors and ourselves, source a lot of that out of China. So as you see, we had a strength of the dollar against the euro, but it wasn't gaining as much against the Chinese RMB. So big disadvantage for us financially against our competitors. Recently, they've both been trending the other direction together, and that's helpful to us. So for us, a weak dollar is good, and that might be opposite for many others. Then local, what is our challenge? I focus on our manufacturing side, although the demographics are not so dissimilar on the rest of the side. But for engineering and other technology type people, we have a very good pool of talent available. Manufacturing is a different story. So we have a very high age profile, and replacement of this workforce going forward is going to be a challenge. Along with that age profile comes much higher healthcare costs, as William mentioned, is that it's definitely tied to what percentage of your population is above a certain age where you're actually consuming healthcare more. So there's not enough talent. We have gaps in our current workforce to handle the technology today. To compete against our global competitors, we can't do it on being lower wage. We're not. We have to be better technically. So we have to have a more capable workforce that can handle the new technology and a more flexible workforce. And to attract people to the industry then is also changing the perception of what a manufacturing job is. This is hard to get young people to be interested in this field because there's a negative connotation to it. Everybody wants to be doing something internet related or something like that. So that's a real challenge. On the positive side, I would say for the region and for the state is we have a good network of technical high schools, and we have representation on the boards of 7 of these schools as well as the Quincy Community College. So there is a commitment in the area to developing this future workforce. And then I think there is good support statewide in terms of training grant money. We've gotten grants of approximately $250,000, and we use that to develop our own people and to train newcomers. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks again, Michael. Before I introduce the next speaker, I just wanted to mention again the index cards that are on the middle of everyone's table. If you've taken time to write out any questions you may have for our panelists, we will be collecting those during the next speech. Now on to our final speaker of the day. John Pranckevicius is Massport's CFO and Secretary-Treasurer, where he oversees Massport's financial responsibilities, including treasury, budgeting, accounting, debt and investments, finance, and risk management. Under John's leadership, Massport's bond ratings were recently upgraded by both Moody's and Standard & Poor's and is now the highest rated airport in the country. So an early round of applause for him on that. John is a board member of the East Boston Foundation and also sits on the board of Worcester Credit Union and the Worcester Research Bureau. Prior to joining Massport, John served in various financial roles for the city of Worcester for nearly 15 years, and his last 3, he was Chief Financial Officer. So welcome back to Worcester, and welcome to the stage, John Pranckevicius.
Thanks, Colleen. Morning, everyone. If it's okay, I'm going to walk around a little bit. Getting up here is a little bit stale, so if it's okay with everyone, I'm going to just try to move around the stage a little bit. First and foremost, let me thank Peter and Tim for the invitation today. Excited to be here. I also want to give a thank you to the team of Massport, Retrix, and JetBlue for being part of this wonderful event. They are the rock stars. That's the rock group here in Worcester for Worcester Regional Airport. And if you haven't noticed, just a little plug, there's a keychain that's made out of some of the materials Michael was talking about today. That's on your table. Only kidding. There is a light, so at the end we're going to dim the lights, and we want you to go, hey-oh, hey-oh, hey-oh. So let me say, today's a special day for me for a couple reasons. One, about 5 years ago, a community like this came into this room and set the stage for JetBlue to take hold at Worcester Regional Airport. And I'm proud to say, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the presentation, that next month will be over 500,000 passengers will have gone through Worcester Regional Airport since their inception. So that's a very special day and a testament to this community. Today's also a special day because my older sister, for the first time, is in the audience. Gail, just wave your hand. Come on. Thank you for indulging me on that. I've been doing this for about 26 years, and this is the first time she showed up, so I don't know what that tells you. So hopefully I don't screw it up, Gail. Just want to make sure I know how this works. There we go. So who is the Massachusetts Port Authority? Massachusetts Port Authority, we are a huge transportation agency, that is true. But we also like to think of ourselves as an economic development agency, and I'll show you why, hopefully, as part of this presentation. So we operate three businesses. One is aviation, obviously. People think of Massport, Logan Airport comes to mind. Worcester Regional Airport should be the first on your list. The second, we have Hanscom Field. That's our premier general aviation, a lot of jet activity in that area. It's a reliever for that opportunity from Logan Airport. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on maritime. We have a strong maritime business operation at the Port Authority. We have Conway Terminal, we have cruise businesses, seafood activity, and what we have is Subarus going through the Boston Auto Port. And we are a pretty big real estate agency. We have premier properties in South Boston, both on the commercial side and on the maritime and industrial side. And that's very advantageous because it provides us some opportunities with our maritime business. So Logan, by the numbers, real quick, we do 1,200 flights a day, 100,000 plus passengers a day. Most importantly, the stat that's not on here is we do 17,000 cups of Dunkin' Donuts coffee each and every day. Okay, so Dunkin' Donuts, we're good with you. The other stat that I think is interesting in climbing is we do over 300,000 Uber trips dropped off. This is a new phenomenon for us and is transforming our business. Economic engine for the Commonwealth, we have $13 billion of economic activity, $1.8 billion alone from international flights, 17,000 jobs at Logan. Massport has about 1,400 employees. Airlines expecting growth over the course of the next year. JetBlue, Delta, Spirit, all adding seats to the airport. International is not growing as fast. We went on a significant wave over the past 5 years. They're growing about 2%. Over the next 3 years, we will hit 45 million passengers at Logan International Airport. It's a streak. This is better than your charts, Jeff. That growth rate that we have seen over the last 10, 12 years has been tremendous, and it's both a combination of domestic and international activity. Maritime by the numbers, 270,000 cargo containers go through the port. 194 container ships, 4 services weekly, 850 million of ongoing investment, 388,000, almost 400,000 cruise passengers will be going through the port, and that number will be climbing. 4.6 billion of economic impact for the state. But more importantly, it's not just the city of Boston sort of port. All these businesses across Massachusetts use Conley Terminal container facility to transfer their goods, import and export their goods. We've on a record here. We've been growing about 30% over the past 5 or 6 years, we are at the upper end of our growth rates. What do we ship out there? One of the biggest areas of our exports and imports is alcohol. I'll say it again, alcohol. Why is that? I don't know. I'll leave that up to you to decide. One of the biggest challenges we have is the shipping industry is growing at a rapid pace. They have to create an economy of scale on the ship to be able to be competitive in the global economy. Our facilities were built for 4,000 container, 5,000 container ships. We're now seeing 14,000 container ships coming through the port. There's a huge significant investment that's required in order to keep pace with that global economy. On the cruise port side, over 400,000 passengers, as I mentioned. That too is on the upper end of our growth rate. So that's a great indication of what's happening in the local economy. Just wanted to throw this picture up. Right now, this is the scale of the size of the ships that we service today. The larger ships are more the ships that are coming into Boston and want to come to Massachusetts as part of their destinations. So that's a major challenge. Our facilities are struggling to keep pace with this. And as a result of that, both the growth in Worcester Airport, the growth at Logan Airport, and the growth in our container business, our capital program, our investment will be doubling. And that's both good and bad. The good news is this is a huge primer for the economy overall. The challenge here, quite frankly, is since the last economic recession and the impact that it had to the construction industry, we're seeing some challenges with respect to trying to keep pace with our construction workforce and the labor market. So the economic impact of that, we envision 47,000 total jobs being created as a result of that investment over the next 5 years. But what I'm really here to talk about in the short few minutes I have left is Worcester Regional Airport. We wouldn't be here today if I want to single out Tim Murray. Tim Murray was the leader up when he was lieutenant governor who had the foresight to come in and say to Massport, you should own Worcester Airport. The city of Worcester has done its job, whatever it could do, but the fact that we're a transportation agency, we're better off being able to leverage our partnerships. So it's his leadership that is bringing the success that we are seeing today. So Massport, having a vision for the airport, is investing over $100 million into the facility to make it a transportation asset for central Massachusetts. And that investment, we believe, will be paying off by a 3-in-1 investment. Over $300 million of economic activity will be generated as a result of that investment. And what I wanted to just prelude a little bit of what's to come in the future is back in 1989, at the high end of Worcester Airport, that was a long time ago, over 350,000 passengers used the facility. That was considered the heyday. In the next 3 years, our target is to meet that same number. But here's the catch. We can bring all the planes we want to the airport, to destinations across the country. But it's the people in this room who will need to use it. Let me emphasize, you will need to use Worcester Regional Airport for it to be successful. And I can't stress that enough. So if there's one takeaway today, take your little light. It's time to turn the lights. Only kidding. But thank you very much. This ends my presentation. Please visit Worcester Regional Airport.
All right, thanks, John. You can actually take your seat up here, and if I'd like to invite the rest of the panelists up, have a lot of cards to get through with questions as well as my own, so I think we're in for a treat. All right, first, how about another round of applause? I think everyone in their presentations really, it was a great balance and certainly left us with a lot of questions. So I'm going to start off with a kind of a global, a national question. I think, Jeff, you can take this first, although, Michael, I think maybe you could also weigh in. A recent Wall Street Journal article discussed an increase in commodity prices, which in combination with rising wage pressure could result in raised prices. I'm sure you've read that. I'm sure you have comments on that. How is this going to affect us, if at all?
Well, so what commodity prices primarily signal is that global activity is reasonably healthy. And when it is, of course, it needs more commodities for inputs and prices rise. Commodities as a share of inflation in the United States are 7% or so. It's a relatively small share of the overall input cost on average in the U.S. economy. But you also mentioned that there are some signs that wages are starting to increase. You know, some of that is a healthy wage increase. We had seen subdued wage increases in an earlier part of the recovery. Seeing it increase a bit, I think, is actually a good sign. I don't know if everyone knows that the share of total income in the U.S. that goes to labor over the last 25 years has been declining significantly. So we'd kind of like to see some of that turn around a bit, because it's fine to compensate capital and owners of capital for what they do to make things in the U.S. Labor needs to get a better share. In terms of the implications for inflation and the overall economic outlook, we have been below our target of 2% inflation for the last several years. We expect, partly because of the factors you mentioned, partly because we have an economy operating at least at full employment, possibly beyond. We expect inflation to get back up to 2% and maybe a bit above in coming years. Is that the end of the world? Not at all. I think that's fine. What we want to avoid is a kind of boom-bust cycle where we significantly overstress the economy for a number of years, and then in one way or another, things will start to unravel. Either we'll see inflation going up to an undesirably high level that would affect everybody in the room adversely, or we'll see financial markets taking on more risk than is healthy. You may recall that in 2006, 7, 8, leading up to the Great Recession and the financial crisis, that was the hallmark of what was going on. We don't want to repeat that. So I think modest increases in wages, fine. Small increases in inflation, okay. That chart I showed you with the gray bars, that's what we're trying to avoid getting, with an overstressed situation where we really turn into a bad economic downturn that would be bad for everybody.
And Michael, your business is both obviously here domestically and then globally. So is this something that Primetals is experiencing?
Well, I mean, rising commodity prices, negatively affect us on our purchase of materials and make the cost of our goods increase. But usually it's overall favorable, because if the commodity prices are increasing, our customers are commodity producers. They will increase output, which grows our service business. And if they believe that the commodity price trend will be favorable going forward, then they start making investment. And when they invest, then that's also beneficial for us. So in general, we don't see rising commodity prices as a negative influence on our business.
Okay. Anyone else want to weigh in? We have a lot to get through, unless you feel strongly. Okay. Well, actually, this is a question that came from the audience, and I know you touched on this in your presentation, but how can brick and mortar stores continually combat the e-commerce market? I mean, we saw the hands raised with Amazon Prime. We also, in this past year, saw the fall or the closing of Elwyn Adams' hardware store on Main Street, been there since the 1700s. So you have certainly guided Aubuchon Hardware through a lot of ups and downs and looking at the future, but how can you marry both the in-store experience as well as the e-commerce?
Well, I think first, just to recognize, this country is overstored. It's a bit of a day of reckoning. I think there's going to be, last year there was more closing of retail outlets than ever before in a long time. I think that pressure will continue to come down to a new sort of equilibrium. And I think the key is to do exactly what you just asked at the end of your question, is come up with an experience, a physical experience and a digital experience that complement each other. Because I do believe there's nothing more convenient than a neighborhood store. And I do believe, again, I repeat that I think consumers will go to stores more and more for people and those relationships. And so retailers that focus on the innovation piece as well as the people piece can find a way. But we are in a bit of a day of reckoning for retail.
Michael, are you seeing that at all with what you produce? And yes, it's going to certainly down the chain. But you mentioned that products that may have gotten their birth right in your business, and how they're translating into a mom and pop store.
Well, I mean, for us, what the equipment we supply and where it, how it's used by our customer, it's really one small piece in a long chain of production. So I don't think there's really any impact to say, our business, and really to a large extent our direct customers' business, with this kind of change. In fact, maybe it's a, I think the order online, pick up in store. I mean, the products I mentioned that I see on the Aubuchon website, they're not generally in store, but you can order them and pick them up at the store. And so for my customers, I would see that that's just another, outlet for them, and this might be a beneficial thing.
Segueing into transportation, and we saw the great outlook for the Worcester Regional Airport from where we were in the late 1980s to where you're hoping to be in 2020. But how much, and maybe not just with the Worcester Regional Airport, but with transportation on the cruise area, aviation, is driven by the economic progress. I mean, we did see the drop in 2008 with the fall. So how can that continue to be on the up with a lot of uncertainties in the market?
Sure. Great question, Colleen. I'm getting a little bit of a flashback, but because about 15 years ago, Colleen used to put the camera in front of the face when she was a reporter for Channel.
No, now we just have a whole
now this is a
room of eyes
that's right.
on you.
So thank you. Massachusetts has many advantages, and it's those advantages that allow us, at least in the transportation side, to see the growth that you have showed up on the slides. So there's a few things. One is the economy here. We just did a presentation at the board yesterday. When you look at certain elements of our economy, they have a higher level of disposable income and net wages. They happen to be high travel-oriented industries as well, and that is feeding our market. So that's number one. The other piece I would say is Massachusetts is a destination. And that has been very helpful in terms of getting the level of activity from a cruise passenger standpoint and from a travel standpoint. And the third thing I would say is technology. From an international side, we're able to see planes that are much more efficient and can handle the market that we have here in Massachusetts to fill those planes and have the yield necessary for airlines to make that investment. And that's stimulating travel here in Massachusetts and primarily Logan Airport. And I will say the fourth thing is there's fabulous institutions. And they draw a great deal of people to the marketplace. So those would be the four things I think that are advantages we have in stimulating the activity we're seeing.
Okay. I'm going to turn to another question from the audience, and this is for you, Jeff. What is your forecast for the real estate market? Wide question there.
Everybody, listen up.
So which market? Do you mean the Worcester real estate market or just generally?
You know what, it does not specifically say, and I know that that's, why don't we take a look at, Worcester/Massachusetts?
Okay. So the fundamentals for real estate are pretty good in that, employment has increased, incomes are increasing. Even with modest increase in mortgage rates, the affordability of housing for many families, but not all, is fairly good. And so we've seen relatively consistent increases of 5 to 6% on average in Massachusetts in the price of residential real estate. There are some areas, of course, that are hotter, some that are a little bit cooler. And as you know, in real estate, location is everything, so the details matter by location. But it looks as if we're going to have a decent growth in new construction where that's possible, in renovations, and in house prices and existing sales. There is still, it seems, a shortage of available stock for already built houses in many locations in the Commonwealth. And that's an interesting phenomenon. It still seems to be a bit of a hangover from the housing crash that occurred starting in 2006. There's still people who are holding back on putting houses on the market or waiting until prices get up high enough that they recover even what they had at the height of the market, which is not the case in every location. So there's still a bit of a supply constraint for existing housing, but that is keeping prices going up, and of course that's a spur to additional construction. And because the underlying fundamentals from the purchaser side are good, we continue to see a pretty good outlook for residential real estate in the Commonwealth. I don't know if folks were also interested in commercial real estate. That's a somewhat different picture. Yes, they are?
Sure,
Of course
yes, they are, yes.
You can read minds
I
and
can.
you know that that's what they're thinking. And there, there has been a significant commercial real estate boom. The real estate, the retail sector notwithstanding. And I think William was wise to mention that this is a part of the tsunami hitting the retail sectors. There's a tremendous overbuilding there. But in the office and commercial side, and to some extent the public side, there's been a significant building increase. So my boss likes to say, if you look out the window of the Federal Reserve Building across from South Station, you see a lot of cranes working around the city of Boston, and that is true around other major cities in the Commonwealth. So commercial real estate is doing pretty well. There's an issue there about whether the price of commercial real estate is getting a little bit ahead of the likely income that those structures can generate, the leasing revenues and so on. I think we're okay on that, but it's one of those things we're keeping an eye on just to make sure it doesn't get out of whack. That's one of the financial instabilities that I alluded to obliquely earlier that can happen when the economy really booms for a long, long time and goes past its sustainable rate. So something we're monitoring, but so far things look pretty healthy on both of those fronts.
Okay. And Michael, you had mentioned with the construction, the steel construction, and we saw the pictures of, not only the automobiles, the bridges, but what's going into buildings these days. So what are you seeing, and if there's a trickle down into the commercial real estate and the demand for your?
Yeah, well, clearly our customer base domestically believes that commercial construction will continue. I mentioned Nucor Steel. One of the new mills that they're going to put in is a medium structural mill. So this will be rolling, larger size beams and things like this. This is used for, it's not for building your house. It's for bridges and commercial type buildings. In the rest of North America, notwithstanding the threats of a wall on our southern border in Mexico, we've sold contracts that will add more than 2 million tons of capacity into Mexico. So, they're also believing that, development is going to take place.
Another question from the audience, and this is actually kind of following what you were talking about, but can you comment on the proposed tariffs of Chinese steel imports and the impact on U.S. manufacturers who use steel in their products? And this is to you, Michael.
Well, clearly the tariff situation will prop up, U.S. producer prices, and this will increase the cost of goods for everybody that uses those materials, which is quite broad spread of things, So I think the concern with tariffs is always you just start some various retaliation measures, and what I find always interesting, disappointing. Until 2008, we were a wholly, U.S.-owned company. And our customer base was always happy to lobby Congress about protection for themselves, but would not give preference to a U.S. supplier of equipment. So usually, this is the way the world works, I guess. But so surely China, the whole world is putting tariffs against China. But the people need to understand, so prop up the price side, but the other inputs to making steel, coking coal and things like this, the Chinese own that global capacity of those materials. So they simply crank up the price of all those things. So it pretty quickly levels itself off.
Okay, all right. From global to a little bit.
Actually, do you mind if I comment
Oh,
on
absolutely.
that trade issue? Just because, so Michael's given an industry-specific perspective, which is really important and valuable, but important from the U.S. consumer, the average citizen's point of view, is that when we raise tariffs, if there are tariff wars, on balance, the benefit to U.S. citizens is small, or in fact, it's a cost. Generally, what it leads to is the cost of things that you buy every day going up. In many cases, for export-sensitive industries, if there's tariff wars, we on net lose jobs in the U.S. Now, there's some benefits for some industries, and those are important to take into account, but most folks on both sides of the aisle up until this point, have been fairly even-handed about saying generally the trade is good unless you have a country that's dumping or taking undue advantage of its market position. That's a different story. But in general, the trade agreements across the borders, particularly in North America, have been very beneficial for jobs and for consumers getting access to low-cost goods. So, you know, there are 1,000 stories, and I don't want to be too broad brush about this, but the general way of thinking about this is that the trade wars do not benefit the average citizen in the U.S. by and large, either in terms of cost of goods or employment, both. So that's my view anyway. So.
Okay, well, you're the expert.
Well, there's some disagreement, but about whether I'm an expert, for one thing.
Well, again, moving from, from global now to some of the regional sales, and I want to switch back to Will, because you mentioned that in addition to, e-commerce, it's really so important nowadays to have a presence, to know what the customers in your individual areas need and want. So can you discuss how you're able to gauge and respond to, yes, you're in New England and New York, and you would think at first glance that a lot of the customers' needs are the same, but I'm guessing they're not. And how do you respond to that in those trends?
Absolutely. So even though we're in the Northeast, each one of our towns is different. And let me back up. Being on the Cape is different than being in upstate New York, first off. But even when you get down to the individual towns, I think the key driver that changes market demands is local competition. You could have a great local nursery or a great local plumbing supply house or vice versa, and that creates market opportunities. And so from each town that we operate, there has to be the flexibility to meet that supply and demand. And really everything I'm talking about is nothing new, of course, right? It's the essence of what retail is all about. And a really good independent retailer that owns one store, that lives and breathes it in that one store, does that. And that's what makes that independent retailer so good. And so I believe strongly in independent retail. What we're trying to do is do it at scale. And that's a little different because when you normally scale things up, you normally try to cookie cutter things. And so we're trying to find a new way, a new process, a new mindset. It's going to take a new mindset from our store managers all the way up through HQ to support, instead of a top-down approach, a balance between bottom-up, market-specific, and top-down sort of initiatives. And we're in the midst of finding that new rhythm.
Yeah, I was going to segue to you as well.
I was fascinated by the chart you brought up that had Ace Hardware and that franchise. And when you look at your acquisition strategy, what elements go into your decision making in determining whether that's the right store or right area or whatever the case may be in terms of that strategy?
Well, first, though we have big ambitions, one key is there's advantages to staying in our market because we have sort of management structure and marketing efficiencies. So that's first off. And then every deal is different. It's just, we've done about 30 acquisitions in the last 10 years, and each one is very, very unique. Because as you would imagine, these are independent owners that this is their biggest transaction of their life, and each one is unique and different, and we take great care as well in those transactions to sort of carry on their tradition. Hire all their people. Our new strategy is to essentially take their sign and everything that they had, old pictures, and re-merchandise that all on the inside of the store. So it's a very individualized approach, each one. I think, but a key other element is projected sales. So we're looking for, a certain sales level, but a lot goes into it.
Sure. Thank you.
And John, with, in a way, as Will is bringing in, more goods for his stores, and again, I go back to the Amazon and more e-commerce coming in, it lends me to the question about cargo and coming in to Massport, and how is Massport responding to that increased demand, and do we see it at the point that you'd look at, I'm thinking of, Savannah, Georgia, or Charlestown, and these major ports. Is that a way that Massport in Massachusetts is going to go?
Without question, we are challenged by the generational investments we need to make to keep a pace with our competition. Conway Terminal is a niche port. We don't have train access, which limits, quite frankly, the amount of activity that we could handle for the not only the local economy but on a national level. So therefore, everything we have is processed via trucks in the highway system. So a couple of things that we've been looking at. One is our labor costs. So we have worked with our partners, the International Longshoremen, and their contract and labor costs to create a competitive advantage against New York. And a lot of our biggest competition is either New York or Canada, because those are the major outlets that will come and deliver to this area. So that was one focus, labor costs. The other focus had been throughput. So our throughput, where it takes anywhere from 8 to 12 to 24 hours to get a container out of New York, it's 32 minutes in Conway Terminal. So we can have our trucking industry do anywhere from 3 to 4 turns a day, depending on their market, and that creates a competitive advantage. And we are competing against cost. We are geographically advantaged because we are a short distance from Europe. We're typically the first stop, and that allows us to get goods to Massachusetts and the New England region quicker than it would be through New York. So those are the things that we play on, and quite frankly, that has been what's been driving our growth rate over the past 5 years.
Okay, all right. Anyone
And a
else?
lot of beer and wine, too, so keep it up.
Yeah, Sam Adams in Massachusetts. I'm going to touch on something that I believe, Michael, you talked about, but I think we can all look at is the graying of the manufacturing workforce. I read an article recently and someone dubbed it the silver tsunami. We were speaking as we were preparing for this, and you said 1/3 of the manufacturing jobs at Primetals, and I believe you said here in Worcester, the workers are age 60 or older. So how is that something that you need to address, and also with the location of the technical high schools, the higher education, how is that hopefully not keeping you up at night knowing that there is some help?
Well, the way we're addressing that is, what we've, as I'll say, our type of manufacturing has largely vacated this area. It's been harder to recruit people that already have a skill set. So, so we've really worked on, we must have an apprentice program. We must develop and train our own people. And today, at least, we can also work with the local technical schools to do this. And the skill sets are changing. We don't have traditional manual machine tools anymore. It's all CNC. It's higher tech stuff. So we do have our own lab space with 5 small training type machines and teach people controls, and that's how we're attacking it. The challenges we face on, it's tough to support, cost-wise, a large group of people while you're training them before they're productive. I mean, so that's the counter pressure against it. And when we're in a tough market, and we've been in a very tough market in the last years. Our competition globally is very fierce. It's been, trying to balance all those things has been a challenge. But we absolutely need to accelerate this kind of workforce development program because, for our people also, one, I think a few key triggers, right, when they're eligible for Medicare at age 65. And if the stock market does continue to go up, people say, well, look at my 401k balance, I'm ready to retire. So we could have, people retiring sooner rather than later. Although we do have a lot of longevity. Our oldest employee in the manufacturing floor is 82 years old. So no one wants to ever leave. So that's
Good job.
Saying something about the economy, but also your business. Is that something that the Fed is taking a look at, this gap or this drop-off in employment at some areas?
Yeah, it's one of the things we actually can forecast because people who stay alive age exactly 1 year each year. So that we know, and we have some idea of how many will not make it to the next year as well. So we can forecast that, and it is a silver tsunami. It has a number of implications. One that hasn't been touched on is, so our Social Security system, as you probably know, is pay as you go, and that means that those who are working are paying for those who are retired. The ratio of those who are working to those who are retired doesn't look so good when much of the workforce is getting older and retiring. That is a phenomenon that was anticipated more than 30 years ago in a Social Security Commission that Alan Greenspan chaired. He helped to set the Social Security system up for the next 30 years. Well, we're there now. That was in 1986 or 85, I forget which year. We're there now. We're 30 years later. Other adjustments are necessary to the system to make it sustainable. That is part of the reason we have an unsustainable fiscal position in the country going forward, starting now. Bigger than that, of course, is Medicare, but we don't have time to talk about that. But that demographic makes a huge difference. In terms of the workforce, we have contacts with all of the businesses in our region, essentially, almost all of the representing all the businesses in our region. And the most common thing we hear is that we can't find the skills that we need. Now, there are two aspects to that. One is that the relationship between employers and employees has changed over the last 35 years. It used to be that employers would provide on-the-job training, partly because the world is a bit more competitive and tough. Not all our employers are able to do that. But I think the fact is, unless we take seriously making sure that a larger fraction of our young population is appropriately educated and has skills, and some of that is up to the public sector, but you have to pay taxes for that. Some of it is also up to the private sector as a partnership in providing the skills training. Unless we do that, we're going to have a hard time keeping our economy growing in the way that we'd like. And more importantly, a large fraction of the people who come from the lower income spectrums of our communities are not ever going to fully participate in the economy. That's not just a significant drag on the economy, it's a terrible loss of human potential, which is a challenge that I think the country needs to rise to going forward. We have to think carefully about that. That does not mean just shoveling federal money at it. It does mean thinking carefully about how we have public-private partnerships that make sure that more folks in the economy have the requisite skills, get decent and stable jobs, and end up saving some so that when they retire, they're in decent shape. You should one day go to the Boston College Center for Retirement Research and look at the numbers on what the median level of preparedness is for retirement today. It is not good. Most people do not have big 401ks. A few do, and good for them. I'm one of the lucky few, honestly. I feel incredibly lucky to have the position I do and the resources. But many people, and it's not just people who are in the lower income deciles, people in the middle of the income distribution do not have nearly the resources they need to retire. That is a serious problem. Going with it is the problem of training our workforce going forward. So these are things I think our politicians should be talking about. That's not exactly what they're focused on right now, but perhaps at some point they will, and that would be to the benefit of the country.
Well, you mentioned as you're looking at hardware stores across the country, a lot of them are owned by baby boomers, so they will be retiring in the very near future. How do you attract a new workforce in that and also balance it with the push for the increase in the minimum wage?
Well, you know what's interesting is, yes, I think the silver tsunami is going to help us on the acquisition front and the consolidation front, but we've always had a tradition of providing a great first job, a great part-time job, and a great career. So when we look at our age distribution, it's pretty evenly distributed. We don't see a silver tsunami within our business in terms of management. And we just continue to, working in a hardware store, the best thing about working in a hardware store is you learn life skills, unlike any other sort of first job. And so we really play that up. We do a lot of hands-on training. And we've always done that. So we just are going to keep doing that and focusing on people, and it's worked for us a long time, and I think it will continue to work for us.
Jeff, to you, and I brought up the minimum wage, and again, I know Will mentioned that in his presentation, but if it goes through, if you can take a macro look at it, how do you see that this, what effect will it have on the economy?
Well, it's complicated. I want to avoid saying anything that has politics, because the Fed is an independent organization we really need to be. So on the economic side, there is a wealth of research that looks at the effect of minimum wages, and of course it has two basic effects. One is to raise the wages of some of the workers, but the other side is it may reduce employment because, as William suggested, it makes some workers either unaffordable or less affordable for some employers. The balance of that is a bit murky, but I guess what I'd say is it comes close to being a wash. So that's what the research looks like. I think more importantly is thinking about how it is that our richest economy in the world ends up employing a lot of people full-time who cannot really survive on their wages and benefits. And the minimum wage is an intervention into markets that, as William said, is not always great economic policy. It can be. I don't want to take sides on that, but it's a market intervention. We do, however, have a societal problem because there's a large swath of our workers who are working full-time, having relatively poor benefits, and they end up relying on public support just to survive in terms of food and shelter and medical care. That's an odd outcome in an economy where the profit rate for non-financial corporations right now is at an almost all-time high. It's slightly below the all-time high. So that means the revenue, the income is being generated. It's not being shared in a way that I think we would be completely proud of. So for folks who work hard at the lower end of our skills and wage spectrum, the fact that they can't survive without public assistance is not a good sign for our economy. How to solve that is somewhat more complicated for sure, but it's a conversation we're starting to have with employers and with public agencies, because both need to be a part of the solution there. So minimum wage may not be the right solution, and it certainly hits places like hardware stores, other retail establishments, hospitality and dining. It hits them hard, there's no question about that. So we may need better solutions that address the issues that I just highlighted, which are bigger than whether to put a minimum wage in place or not.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that? I know it is a hot button issue, but certainly.
Yeah, I would just, I mean, again, I just want to stress that there is this massive income inequality in this country, and I think it's a bigger problem, and to try to fix it with minimum wage is not, you can't do it. And again, I really believe strongly that there's a starting wage for a high school kid and a first-time job, and to try to make that into a living wage on day one that's where I'm stuck with it.
Just to follow on this, so places like Aubuchon should be applauded because starting off at a minimum wage for first job, the current minimum wage, is okay if you have the prospect of a career that leads to a more sustainable wage, which you guys are thinking about. That is not the case in every industry. So in the hospitality industry, many of the lower level jobs are now outsourced to a third-party corporation that does only low-wage jobs, so that the opportunities for advancement and career development are limited. Now that's not their fault, it's a market development, but it is a phenomenon that affects the welfare of a lot of folks who live in the US. That's something we need to think more carefully about, and I agree, it is a much bigger problem. The minimum wage may help in some circumstances. It's for other people to decide that, but or it may not. But that underlying problem is really, really important and affects many millions of families in the U.S. So we need to think carefully about that.
You know, for me, you know, I have a lot of concern about a $15 an hour minimum wage, not as any direct effect. Our people we don't have anybody that makes a wage at that level, but you know, when my skilled worker who makes something higher than that, how rapidly does that $15 an hour minimum wage push all wages up and essentially put us out of business? I mean, we already have a significant disadvantage against my European competitors on a wage basis. So that would be I think a big issue for us over time. It wouldn't be an immediate direct effect, but it would be very difficult in the longer run if it drives everything else up.
Okay, all right. I'm going to go to another question from the audience. Jeff, this one goes to you again. Anyone else can certainly.
Guys, help me out here, okay?
It's not the minimum wage.
This is the price of being a rock star, Jeff. So.
You have your own theme song. You're going to get extra questions.
Yeah.
10% pullbacks historically occur one time per year. While we didn't see one in 2017, we've already had one in 2018. How many more pullbacks do you see we could see?
So remember, this is asking me to forecast the stock market. There are actually over 10 million papers written that say you cannot forecast where the stock market is going. That's a little exaggeration, but there are thousands of papers written that say, if you look carefully there, you can't forecast where it's going. So I will not, because I do not know. I mean, I think on average, there's some rough parity between the real returns earned in the stock market and the bond markets over long periods of time, but that doesn't help you very much. So, no, I mean, so look, I don't want to forecast the stock market. What I would say that's most important is this. Yes, we had a 10% drop. It was followed by a 4.5% increase. So far, it's temporary. Could it drop more? Yes. It could also continue going up. I think the key lesson for investors is, so one, never, ever, 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 ever believe that you can pick an individual stock and you know where it's going and you're going to make a lot of money on that. I'll bet there's someone in the audience who says, well, I did that, and that's exactly my point. You are the lucky one. There are, 163 other people in the audience who might have tried it and they did not get lucky, and it really has to do with luck. So diversification is really important. The other thing is, it's fine to be invested in stocks as a part of a long-run portfolio. If you have a reasonably long horizon, you should probably do that. What you should not ever do is try to time your portfolio saying, I know when it's going to crash so I can get out in time, and I know when it's going to, just before it's going to come back up so I can play that difference. Don't ever try to do that. You are unlikely to ever succeed, and if you do, you should just say it's like winning the lottery and good luck to you, that's fine. What you should do is, if you think the market's going to go down, just hold on. If you held on in March of 2009 when the market fell by over 40% and just stayed where you were, you're in great shape today, right? And that was one of the worst declines we've seen in post-war history. So if you tried to time it, you might get out in time, you might get in time, or you might just lose more money. If you held and said, it doesn't matter, I'm not spending that money today, you would be in terrific shape today. So my advice is, one, diversify, don't be all in stocks. Certainly don't be in an individual stock. Two, you hold on through downturns because it will come back at some point. And unless you need that money tomorrow, it's best to leave it alone. So that's what I will not forecast the stock market. I would be terrible at it, I'm quite sure. So.
Not a forecast with some great advice,
Yeah.
so we'll
Do you
take
think
it.
I used enough ever?
Ever.
Never,
Maybe
ever.
one more.
Maybe one more, okay.
I'm going to give you a break if you're
Thank
ready
you.
to go. I'm going to look to the end. John, let's move on to looking at the population trends. And Worcester's population is growing. Surrounding community is starting to be on the uptick, with more people moving out of the high price from Boston into the central part of the state. It's wonderful news that the Worcester Regional Airport is, or JetBlue rather, is bringing in an additional flight to New York in the next several months. Where do you see it growing based on the growth in population here that want that convenience?
Great question. A couple forces, I think, are at work with respect to that. One is the Logan Airport is, I'm not going to say reaching a peak, but its capacity, it's land constrained, so therefore growth is a challenge. The proximity of the airport to the city, is both a blessing and a curse. Businesses love it because they can get in and out. The neighborhoods become challenged because of the fact that there's a lot of activity in and around that area. So we have been able to leverage our relationships with the carriers to stimulate demand, or I should say supply. The demand is going to be a result of the people in this room using the airport. Did I say that again? But the demand is going to be from the people in this room, quite frankly, because it will be important for that to happen. They're prepared to make the investment. They need to see the return. And JetBlue, I can't say enough, has been a fabulous partner with us in allowing to see that happen. The central Massachusetts region has over 1 million potential customers for the use of Worcester Regional Airport. And what I often hear about the challenges is, well, the flights are too high compared to Boston or another facility. But I think what's what I'd like to say to some people who say that is there are other factors you need to look into. And one is, yeah, you can do a search and you can get a price that's probably cheaper than what you would fly out of Worcester Airport. But you're traveling at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, you have a layover in Atlanta, and you're not going to get to your destination. You fly out of Worcester, there's convenient hours, and you will have that day for yourself and the family in a very relaxed atmosphere and using Worcester Regional Airport. There are other costs that you need to look at. Parking is one, ease of travel to and from, time, your personal time. I think those are advantages that I would hope people broaden their view when looking at it. Tough to do, all the search sites, you pop in what you want and bingo, you got a flight, and prices is sort of the key component. From a demographic standpoint, the cruise business is booming. People want to come to Massachusetts because it has a great destination. The other piece of it is we have a high level of income compared to the rest of the country, and those are advantages. The tax changes will be interesting to see what impact that has. Whether the group overall change their habits or move because of costs, remains to be seen. So I would say overall that the Central Mass has a great customer base. It has a great product today, and it will have a better product going forward. And I would say the Massachusetts and what's happening here in this state are all competitive advantages that we're able to capitalize and stimulate the growth that we're seeing from our presentations.
All right. Well, Michael, not to put you on the spot, but how critical is convenient transportation to your business? Not only bringing people in, but exports to make sure that Central Massachusetts is a destination.
For our business, we do a tremendous amount of travel. So
Yes.
What I'm looking for to get our business travel out of Worcester, I need to be able to get to JFK or Newark to then hit some other international location. So connections like that would then for our business make Worcester very convenient. That would be nice to have. Other U.S. destinations as well. So right now, Boston, we enjoy great access to a lot of the world, with nonstop flights. You can get to Shanghai, you can get to Beijing. There's like 6 flights a day to London. So
I'm going to sign him up. He's a good advertiser. I love it.
We're getting it all on camera.
I think you can maybe
Testimonial right
you
here.
can get to Hong Kong, Singapore, maybe.
That's right.
Also. So it's and a lot of our work is in Asia. So we really like what we have for transportation. I would love to be able to get from Worcester to one of those international destinations as a start.
Baby steps.
We're working on it. We're working on it.
Will, anything to add?
We do domestic travel, and I remember I would always bring my boys growing up. It's such an easy place to get to just watch the airplanes taking off and everything. It would be wonderful. It's great to hear about the movement in Worcester Airport, and as it continues, you have my commitment. I would definitely fly.
Right. Signing you up.
Okay, it's great.
All right, well, we're going to end there on this great regional positive note, and I want to thank our panelists for a very lively discussion. Thank you.
So a terrific job by everyone up here. Thank you, Colleen, and thank you for some terrific presentations and a great conversation. I want to thank, just to wrap up, our partners, the Worcester Regional Chamber, Bank of America, U.S. Trust for your support. We appreciate it. Corporate sponsors, Worcester Regional Airport, supporting sponsors, Bolus Lynch, Cumulus Global, National Grid, Spectrum Business, and special thanks to the Beechwood Hotel, our host, Curry Printing for all the printing, Elevation Exhibits, Revelation Productions did a great job on the sound, and all the whole show up here, and Ron Belay Photography. Thank you. So we're going to listen. Appropriately so, we're going to wrap this up with kind of our theme song, and in order to recognize this, not just Jeff, but this panel as a rock star panel. We got sunglasses for everybody. There's a pair. Hold on. And so I'd like to hear.
Brothers got that gas and they always be smoking like a Rasta. When we call up on no, you show up, man, them the shot toss. When my homies pull up on your block, they make that thing go grata-ta-ta.
You know, one last thing. If you ever want to play this song, you gotta say, Alexa, play the clean version, okay? The real song is just unlistenable. So, trust me. Thank you all.
Thank